Hey there, I'm Alex. You can train harder than ever, never skip a workout, and still feel stuck. Not because you lack discipline, but because you do not fully control your nutrition inputs yet. In this video, you will learn how proteins, carbs, and fats actually work in your body and how to use macros as a practical tool to reach your fitness goals. You can watch this video during your workout and learn while you train. Part 1. Energy, macros, and why your body changes. When progress feels confusing, it is rarely because training is wrong. More often, it is because nutrition lacks a clear framework. To move forward with confidence, it helps to understand what actually controls physical change. That framework starts with macronutrients, usually shortened to macros. Macros are protein, carbohydrates, and fats. They are called macronutrients because the body needs them in large amounts. Together, they provide energy and supply the raw materials that allow your body to function, repair itself, and adapt to training stress. Macros are not a trend or a trick. They are simply a way to describe what food is made of and what your body uses to operate. Protein supplies amino acids, which are used to build and maintain muscle tissue and many other structures. Carbohydrates and fats primarily supply energy, which fuels movement, training, and recovery. Some macros do both. Understanding this removes emotion from food choices and replaces it with clarity about function and purpose. Tracking macros is often misunderstood. It is not done because numbers are special or because the body responds to spreadsheets. Tracking works because it turns vague intentions into measurable inputs. Instead of guessing whether intake supports a goal, tracking shows what is actually happening. This feedback loop is powerful. It allows adjustment without panic and progress without relying on motivation alone. Even if tracking is temporary, it teaches portion awareness and reveals patterns that would otherwise stay hidden. To use macros correctly, it is essential to separate calories from macros conceptually. Calories represent energy. Energy balance determines the direction of body weight change over time. When intake consistently exceeds expenditure, body weight trends upward. When intake is consistently lower, body weight trends downward. This principle holds regardless of food quality, timing, or macro distribution. It is not opinion, and it does not change with different diet styles. Macros influence what happens inside that energy balance. They shape body composition, performance, hunger, and recovery. Two people can eat the same amount of energy and experience different outcomes, depending on how that energy is distributed between protein, carbohydrates, and fats. One may gain more muscle, the other more fat. One may feel strong and consistent, the other tired and hungry. This is where macros become tools rather than rules. To understand why macros matter, it helps to look at what happens day to day inside the body. Training does not build muscle by itself. Training provides a stimulus. Lifting weights creates mechanical tension and metabolic stress in muscle tissue. That stress is a signal, not growth. Adaptation happens later, when the body responds to that signal. For adaptation to occur, the body needs enough energy, enough building materials, and enough recovery time, especially sleep. Inside muscle tissue, there is a constant balance between building and breaking down proteins. Muscle protein synthesis is the process of building new muscle proteins. Muscle protein breakdown is the process of dismantling old or damaged ones. Both happen all the time. Training shifts this balance toward building, but only if nutrition supports it. Protein intake supplies the raw materials. Energy availability determines how strong the response can be. Over time, the net result of this balance determines whether muscle is gained, maintained, or lost. This is why performance matters so much. Adaptation follows performance, not intention. If training quality is high and progressive overload is applied consistently, the signal for adaptation is strong. If nutrition undermines training quality, the signal weakens. When carbohydrates or fats are too low for training demands, energy availability drops, sets feel heavier, volume tolerance declines, and technique degrades earlier. Even small drops in performance, repeated over weeks, slow progress significantly. Protein plays a special role during fat loss phases. When energy intake is lower, the body looks for ways to conserve resources. Without sufficient protein, muscle tissue can be used as a source of amino acids. This leads to loss of lean mass, reduced strength, and a less athletic appearance. Adequate protein intake during a deficit helps protect muscle, supports recovery, and keeps training productive even when calories are restricted. With all these variables, it is easy to overcomplicate nutrition. That is why prioritization matters. Not every detail has equal impact. Consistency comes first because a plan that cannot be repeated does not work. After consistency comes total energy intake because energy balance sets the direction of change. Protein comes next because it directly supports muscle retention and growth across all goals. Only after these are in place do carbohydrate and fat distribution, timing, and finer details become meaningful. This hierarchy does not dismiss advanced strategies, it simply puts them in the correct order. Timing, food quality, and meal composition all matter, but they work best when the foundation is solid. Many plateaus happen not because advanced details are missing, but because fundamentals are unstable. When priorities are respected, adjustments become precise rather than desperate. Different goals require different setups, but the framework remains the same. For muscle gain, energy intake is slightly higher than expenditure. Protein intake remains high to support muscle protein synthesis. Carbohydrates are sufficient to fuel hard training and high volume. Fats remain adequate to support normal physiology and keep the diet sustainable. The goal is steady progress without excessive fat gain. For fat loss, energy intake is lower than expenditure. Protein intake becomes even more important to preserve lean mass and maintain performance. Carbohydrates and fats are adjusted based on training demands and hunger management. Some people perform better with higher carbohydrates. Others feel more stable with slightly higher fats. The correct choice is the one that keeps training strong and adherence high. Body recomposition is slower and demands patience. Energy intake stays close to maintenance. Training progression remains the primary driver. Protein intake stays consistently high. Changes are subtle but meaningful over time. This approach rewards precision and consistency rather than extremes and quick fixes. Many common beliefs about nutrition create unnecessary fear. Carbohydrates do not cause fat gain by themselves. Chronic energy surplus does. Fats are not inherently bad. They are essential for normal physiological function and nutrient absorption. Protein does not build muscle automatically. It enables muscle growth only when paired with adequate training stimulus and recovery. Removing these misconceptions clears mental space and allows focus on execution. When the big picture is understood, nutrition stops feeling random. Meals become purposeful rather than emotional. Progress is evaluated over weeks instead of days. Adjustments are made calmly based on feedback, not frustration. Calories determine the direction of change. Macros shape the outcome of that change and influence how strong, energetic, and consistent the process feels along the way. Mastering this framework gives control over results instead of leaving them to chance. Part 2. Protein. Protein sits at the center of every meaningful physical adaptation you are trying to create. Strength, muscle size, recovery speed, and even how well you tolerate hard training all depend on it. Protein is not a supplement category or a bodybuilding stereotype. It is a fundamental nutrient built into how your body repairs and rebuilds itself. When training intensity rises, protein stops being just important and becomes structurally necessary for progress. At a biological level, protein is made of amino acids. These amino acids are not only used for muscle tissue, they are required to maintain connective tissue, enzymes, transport proteins, immune cells, and many signaling molecules. Muscle simply gets the spotlight because resistance training dramatically increases its turnover. When protein intake is insufficient, the body still meets essential needs, but it does so by prioritizing survival over performance or physique improvement. Training creates disruption inside muscle fibers. That disruption is intentional. It is what signals the body to adapt. Protein provides the material required to repair that damage and reinforce the tissue so it becomes stronger and more resilient. This process is not instant. It unfolds over hours and days after training. Without enough protein available during that window, the rebuilding process is incomplete and adaptation slows even if training effort remains high. The core mechanism behind muscle change is muscle protein synthesis. This is the process through which new muscle proteins are built. At the same time, muscle protein breakdown is always occurring as older or damaged proteins are removed. Training increases both processes, but nutrition determines which side dominates. Protein intake supplies amino acids that allow synthesis to exceed breakdown. Over time, repeated small advantages in this balance lead to visible muscle gain or preservation. Lifting weights increases the demand for protein because it accelerates protein turnover. Muscles are being remodeled more frequently, not just repaired. The harder and more often you train, the more often this remodeling occurs. This is why protein requirements scale with training volume and intensity. Someone training casually can maintain muscle with less protein than someone pushing progressive overload multiple times per week. Protein becomes even more critical during fat loss. When calories are reduced, the body looks for internal sources of energy and raw materials. Without adequate protein intake, muscle tissue becomes a target. This leads to strength loss, slower metabolism relative to muscle mass, and a less athletic appearance. Higher protein intake during a calorie deficit helps preserve lean tissue and keeps training productive despite lower energy availability. A common source of confusion is how much protein is actually needed. There is no single perfect number that applies to everyone, but there is a reliable range that works for most people training with resistance. Protein intake should scale with body size, training demands, and goals. Muscle gain, fat loss, and maintenance all benefit from relatively high protein intake compared to sedentary populations. Precision matters less than consistency within an effective range. The higher end of that range becomes more useful in specific situations. During fat loss, higher protein supports muscle retention and appetite control. When training volume is high, protein needs rise with recovery demands. As body fat levels decrease, the margin for muscle loss narrows, making protein more protective. With age, the muscle-building response becomes slightly less sensitive, and higher protein intake helps compensate for that reduced responsiveness. Protein quality matters, but not in an extreme or exclusionary way. Proteins are often described as complete or incomplete based on whether they contain all essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are those the body cannot produce and must obtain from food. Leucine receives special attention because it plays a key role in triggering muscle protein synthesis. This does not mean leucine alone builds muscle, but it helps initiate the building process. Animal-based proteins, such as meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, naturally contain all essential amino acids in favorable proportions. Plant-based proteins can absolutely support muscle growth as well, but they often require slightly higher total intake and thoughtful food combinations to ensure essential amino acid needs are met. This is not a limitation, just a planning consideration. Adequate total protein and variety make both approaches effective. How protein is distributed across the day influences how effectively it is used. The body does not store amino acids in the same way it stores carbohydrates or fats. Very large protein intakes in a single sitting do not translate into proportionally larger muscle-building responses. Spreading protein intake across meals tends to stimulate muscle protein synthesis more consistently throughout the day and supports ongoing recovery. The idea of a narrow anabolic window after training is often overstated, but timing still has practical value. Consuming protein relatively close to training helps ensure amino acids are available when muscles are most sensitive to rebuilding. That said, daily protein intake and regular distribution matter far more than exact timing. Consistency across days beats perfection within a single hour. In real life, protein works best when it anchors meals. Choosing a clear protein source first makes meal planning easier and more reliable. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks all become opportunities to support recovery rather than random eating events. This approach reduces the need for constant tracking and makes nutrition feel structured instead of restrictive. High-protein foods exist across budgets and preferences. Meat, fish, eggs, dairy, legumes, tofu, and tempeh can all contribute meaningfully. Supplements like whey, casein, or plant-based protein powders are useful tools when convenience matters, but they are not mandatory. They do not replace whole foods. They simply help fill gaps when schedules or appetite make eating difficult. Many problems with protein intake come from subtle mistakes rather than lack of effort. Eating clean but avoiding protein-rich foods often leads to underconsumption. Grazing on small snacks instead of building proper meals spreads calories thinly without supporting recovery. At the other extreme, pushing protein so high that carbohydrates and fats are crowded out can reduce training performance and overall energy, slowing progress despite discipline. When protein intake is handled correctly, nutrition becomes simpler. Protein becomes the stable base that protects muscle, supports recovery, and anchors appetite. Calories can rise or fall depending on the phase. Carbohydrates and fats can be adjusted to support performance or satiety. Protein remains consistent, quietly doing its job in the background. In practical terms, protein is the macro that ensures training effort translates into results. It does not replace hard work in the gym, but it determines how much of that work turns into muscle rather than fatigue. Hit your daily protein target, distribute it across the day, choose sources that fit your lifestyle, and keep the rest of your nutrition flexible around it. Protein is not magic, but it is foundational. When it is respected, recovery improves, training quality rises, and body composition changes become predictable instead of frustrating. That is why protein earns its place as the anchor macro for both muscle growth and recovery. Part 3. Carbs and Fats. After protein is in place, carbohydrates and fats become the levers that control how training feels and how sustainable your nutrition strategy is. These two macros are often treated as enemies, swapped back and forth depending on trends, but in reality, they solve different problems. Carbohydrates primarily fuel performance, while fats support normal physiology and long-term adherence. When they are understood and used correctly, they stop competing for attention and start working together to support consistent progress. Carbohydrates are the primary training performance macro for most resistance training. When carbohydrates are consumed, they are broken down into glucose. Glucose that is not immediately used is stored as glycogen, mainly inside muscle tissue and the liver. Muscle glycogen is especially important because it fuels repeated muscle contractions during training. Every hard set, every rep taken close to failure draws from these glycogen stores. When they are full, performance capacity is higher. Glycogen availability strongly influences training volume and intensity. High-volume sessions, shorter rest periods, and hypertrophy-focused training all rely heavily on stored carbohydrates. When glycogen is sufficient, strength is more repeatable across sets and exercises. When it is low, output drops faster. Sets feel heavier than expected, rest times stretch, and total work completed declines. Over time, this reduces the training stimulus needed for adaptation, even if effort remains high. Carbohydrates also affect how hard training feels subjectively. Adequate carbohydrate intake lowers perceived effort for the same workload. This matters because training quality is not just about what is written in the program, but about how well you can execute it. When effort feels manageable, technique stays sharper, focus lasts longer, and progressive overload becomes easier to apply week after week. Carbohydrate timing does not need to be complicated to be effective. Consuming carbohydrates before training is most useful when sessions are long, demanding, or repeated within the same day. In these situations, having glucose readily available improves output and delays fatigue. This is especially relevant for advanced athletes or anyone combining resistance training with conditioning or sport-specific work. After training, carbohydrates support recovery by replenishing glycogen stores. This becomes more important when training frequency is high or when another session is planned soon. However, the total amount of carbohydrates consumed over the day matters more than precise timing. If daily intake matches training demands, glycogen will be restored over time, even without perfect post-workout nutrition. The type of carbohydrates consumed influences hunger, energy stability, and diet adherence. Whole food carbohydrate sources tend to digest more slowly, provide fiber, and supply micronutrients that support overall health. These foods promote satiety and stable energy levels across the day. Highly processed carbohydrates digest quickly and can be useful around training, but when they dominate intake, hunger control often worsens and energy becomes less predictable. Fiber plays a key role in how carbohydrate intake feels in practice. Fiber slows digestion, increases fullness, and supports normal gut function. Diets very low in fiber often feel harder to maintain, especially during fat loss. Including fiber-rich carbohydrate sources helps control appetite without reducing performance, making calorie control more sustainable over time. Fats serve a different purpose. Dietary fats are essential for normal physiological function. They are involved in hormone production, cell membrane integrity, nervous system health, and absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. This does not mean that increasing fat intake automatically improves hormones or performance. It means that chronically low fat intake can impair normal function and undermine long-term progress. Fats also strongly influence satiety and food enjoyment. Meals that contain adequate fat tend to be more satisfying and emotionally sustainable. This matters because adherence is not just about discipline, but about how livable the diet feels. A nutrition plan that looks optimal on paper but feels miserable in daily life will not survive long enough to produce results. Taking fat intake too low can backfire. Mood may decline, hunger may become erratic, and food focus can increase. Training motivation may drop even if calories are technically sufficient. These effects are not a sign of weakness. They are signals that essential needs are not being met. Maintaining a reasonable minimum fat intake supports both physical function and psychological stability. Meeting fat needs does not require extreme choices. Common foods like olive oil, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, eggs, and dairy can easily cover essential requirements. Including these foods regularly helps maintain balance without turning nutrition into a restrictive exercise. Choosing how to split carbohydrates and fats depends on training style, goals, and personal preference. High-volume resistance training and mixed training that includes conditioning often benefit from higher carbohydrate intake. In these cases, carbohydrates support performance and recovery, while fats remain adequate but not emphasized. Some people prefer fewer meals and stronger satiety. For them, slightly higher fat intake with moderate carbohydrates can work well. This approach can still support strength training as long as total energy intake and carbohydrate availability match training demands. The key is that performance does not suffer. During fat loss, carbohydrates and fats become adjustable tools. Protein remains stable, calories are lower. Some people maintain training intensity better with more carbohydrates. Others manage hunger and cravings better with slightly higher fats. The best split is the one that keeps training productive while making the diet repeatable. During muscle gain phases, carbohydrates often take priority. Higher training volumes and progressive overload demand readily available energy. Adequate carbohydrates make hard training feel sustainable and support better performance over time. Fats remain sufficient to support health and satiety, but they do not need to dominate intake. Body recomposition requires a less dramatic approach. Energy intake stays close to maintenance. Protein remains high. Training progression is the main driver of change. Daily activity is consistent. The carbohydrate and fat split should be simple enough to repeat every day without mental friction. This approach is not exciting, but it works. Many common beliefs about carbohydrates and fats create unnecessary confusion. Eating carbohydrates at night does not cause fat gain by itself. Long-term energy balance determines fat storage. Very low carbohydrate diets are not inherently superior for fat loss. They can work when they help control calories, but they often come with performance trade-offs for resistance training. The idea of a special fat-burning zone oversimplifies physiology. Total work performed and consistency matter far more. When carbohydrates and fats are used correctly, nutrition becomes supportive rather than stressful. Carbohydrates allow you to train hard and repeatedly. Fats keep your system running and your diet livable. The best split is not the one that sounds impressive or extreme, but the one that supports performance, recovery, and consistency over time. In the big picture, protein protects muscle, carbohydrates drive training output, and fats support long-term function and adherence. When these roles are respected, progress becomes predictable. Carbs help you push harder in the gym. Fats help you stay consistent outside of it. Together, they create a nutrition strategy that works in real life, not just in theory. If you want real results, keep it simple and execute consistently. First, decide your goal. Muscle gain means eating slightly more than you burn. Fat loss means eating slightly less. That direction always comes first. Next, lock in protein every single day. Build meals around it, spread it across the day, and treat it as non-negotiable. This is what protects your muscle and makes your training count. Then, adjust carbs and fats to support how you train and how you live. If your workouts feel weak or flat, increase carbs and fuel performance. If hunger and cravings are the problem, raise fats slightly and make meals more satisfying. There is no perfect split, only the split you can repeat daily without breaking consistency. Train hard, recover properly, eat with intention, and stop chasing extremes. When calories set the direction and macros support performance, your body has no choice but to adapt.